On July 22, 2025, the world was shaken by the news that Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, passed away at his home in Buckinghamshire, England, after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. Just 17 days earlier, he had performed his final concert with Black Sabbath at Villa Park, Birmingham, marking the end of a legendary musical journey. However, Ozzy's passing was unlike any other artist's. He chose a completely different path for himself. Even his funeral moved many fans to tears as they witnessed the emotional farewell. In the final moments of his life, the Osbourne family chose to protect his privacy, allowing Ozzy to depart in peace with all the respect and love he truly deserved. Ozzy's final choice. Just hours after Ozzy's death, Sharon Osbourne, his loyal companion, issued an official statement not to seek attention or solicit sympathy, but to protect the privacy of her husband, who had lived a life full of noisy career moments. This was not the passing of a legend, but a silent farewell, a respectful and loving goodbye to someone who had dedicated his life to music and fame, yet ultimately chose a very different ending. Ozzy Osbourne's funeral was not a public event, but a private family story, a moment for those who had loved and understood him throughout his life. Sharon Osbourne, who had stood by Ozzy through all his struggles, refused to let her husband's funeral become an event for the public or media to exploit. Instead, she decided to let him leave in peace without fanfare or loud declarations, but with a quiet, respectful partying, exactly as Ozzy had wanted. Knowing that Ozzy Osbourne's time on this earth was coming to an end, Sharon Osbourne was not only a loving wife, but also a steady hand, a tireless manager in preparing for her husband's final days. The family's readiness did not stem from surprise, but from the years they had spent living with Ozzy's Parkinson's disease. His illness, a cruel disease that robbed him of his physical strength, could never defeat the spirit of a man who had once been a symbol of rebellion and resilience. Since Ozzy received his official diagnosis, Sharon had begun preparing for these final days. She and their children were ready to lose a major part of their family. But the preparation was not only physical. It was also a mental preparation. Step by step, decision by decision. And most importantly, Ozzy's final decision to pass away. Not in a hospital, but in the home he had lived in for his entire life. For Sharon, this was not just a decision on behalf of her husband, but a way to respect Ozzy, a way for him to leave as he had wished. Sharon knew Ozzy did not want to die in a hospital, did not want to spend his final months imprisoned in the cold wars of modern medicine. Ozzy had requested, and Sharon had honored it. No machines, no hospital interventions. Only family loved ones around him and a quiet space for him to pass peacefully. Sharon Osbourne was not merely a loving wife. She was the manager of Ozzy's final days with care and boundless love. The Osbourne family home, where Ozzy had lived happily and fully for decades, had now become a special retreat for him. Sharon had transformed the house into a peaceful haven with 24/7 medical care, but still maintaining the closeness and warmth of a family. Not a cold hospital. Doctors and nurses were carefully selected to support Ozzy during his final months, but all worked in a quiet, gentle atmosphere. All medical devices, all interventions were minimized to preserve the family space. This method of care was not just for Ozzy's health, but to respect his wishes for his death. A death without grandiosity, without noise, but a quiet, peaceful end. Certainly, not everyone could do what Sharon Osbourne did. It was a tireless job full of sacrifice and responsibility. But Sharon never hesitated. She wanted Ozzy to be able to leave us. He wished with nothing interrupted, nothing changed. That was how Ozzy had lived his life, unyielding, resilient, and always choosing his own path. Parkinson's disease not only took away Ozzy's ability to move, but also gradually diminished his ability to communicate. In his final months, Ozzy could no longer speak, and all conversations with him could only be made through his eyes, through the subtle changes in his facial expressions. Every day, Sharon had to witness the man she loved, who had once been a symbol of strength and rebellion, now rendered helpless, almost unable to control his own body. But in all of that, Sharon still saw Ozzy's light, not through recovery, but through his resilience in facing death. Although doctors suggested many treatment options, even methods that could extend his life, Sharon and Ozzy decided to reject them all. The two of them came to an agreement that Ozzy did not want to live dependent on machines, did not want to be bound by medical procedures. They did not want him to endure a life that no longer had quality or joy. Ozzy's death was inevitable. But how he left, that was the only thing they could control. For Sharon, respecting Ozzy's decision was everything. She did not let medical methods intervene in her husband's final moments. This decision was not just about health, but a tribute to the life Ozzy had lived. Sharon did not want Ozzy to leave in distress, did not want medical equipment and noisy care to disturb the peace in his final hours. With all her love and respect, Sharon prepared everything so Ozzy could leave in the way he wanted, peacefully, without pain, without interruption, and without the intervention of a hospital or the noise of the outside world. The final moments. 3 days before Ozzy's death, a video call was arranged. This was the last time his children, Amy, Kelly, and Jack, saw their father alive. Although Ozzy could not speak, his eyes and facial expressions conveyed everything he wanted to say. In the quiet room with the dim afternoon light, everything seemed to settle, leaving only the silence between them. The stillness of family love that needed no words. It was a farewell without loud cries or weeping words. Only glances, invisible signs that only those who have lived together for a lifetime could understand. Jack, Kelly, and Amy looked at their father, saying nothing. But in their eyes, everything was there. Love, regret, comfort, and a farewell that needed no words. Each child understood that this was the last moment they would see Ozzy, the father who had spent his life living fiercely, fighting through the storms of music and life, now leaving in silence. Ozzy's gaze in that moment was not just a farewell but also a deep message of love. Even though he could not speak through his eyes, he was telling his children that he loved them and that he was ready for his final journey. This was not just a goodbye, but a commitment, a sign that everything would be okay, that the family would stay strong as he had always wanted. For Sharon, the final moments by Ozzy's side were sacred, painful, yet full of love. By her beloved husband's side, Sharon did not leave his side for a moment. She held Ozzy's hand, gently whispering words of love. They had promised each other from the very beginning. You've always been, you never changed. And I will always love you. Ozzy, you are the greatest man I have ever known. Sharon whispered those words in a moment of deep emotion. The song Ozzy had written when they were young, when their hearts hadn't yet endured the trials of life, still echoed in the air. I'm going through changes. This lyric was not just a description of a turbulent life, but also a declaration about life change and death. That song had accompanied Ozzy through many years. And now Sharon had chosen it to guide him into eternal rest. Ozzy's death was not a tragic end in a hospital with cold machines. It was a quiet conclusion, one filled with love and acceptance. It was not just the death of a music legend, but the death of a man who had lived fully, fought for freedom and passion. And now he was released into peace. The moments Sharon spent beside Ozzy were some of the most sacred in their lives. She was not just a wife, but a life partner who had weathered every storm with Ozzy. What they had was an unbreakable bond. Even as everything around them changed, it was a goodbye without noise, without loud tears, just presence, companionship in one final moment. Sharon and Ozzy had lived together through life's highs and lows, and now they parted in silence, with all the sweet memories of a life full of love. The decision regarding the funeral when Ozzy passed away, the entire world was suddenly engulfed in sorrow, while the public and fans longed to share in the grief and remembrance. The Osbourne family decided that Ozzy's final moments would be kept in absolute respect and privacy. Sharon, as she had done throughout the years, once again shielded her husband from the spotlight, this time in the last moments of his life. No reporters, no cameras, no one was allowed to intrude on this sacred space. Sharon requested that news of Ozzy's death be kept confidential for 72 hours after his passing. She insisted that there would be no interviews, no press conferences, and no media attention. This was not the time to create sensational stories or emotional narratives from the outside. It was a private goodbye reserved only for the family, a farewell that did not belong to the public. Sharon and her family wanted to keep these moments to themselves without the disruption of outsiders. This was not an easy decision given that Ozzy throughout his life had been familiar with public attention. But Sharon understood that her husband's death, with all the love and respect the family had for him, could not become a public spectacle. Sharon decided to make the funeral a private moment, a space solely for true loved ones to honor Ozzy's life and career in the most respectful way. Ozzy Osbourne's funeral did not feature an extravagant ceremony or public rituals. Sharon decided that this farewell would not involve grandeur, long speeches or praises from those who did not truly understand Ozzy. The funeral would not be an event to attract public attention, but a sacred moment for the family to remember him in peace and respect. Every decision regarding the funeral was made by Sharon with meticulous care. She did not want the events of the day to turn into a media event or a public performance. Instead, the funeral would be an occasion for the family to gather so that each family member could say goodbye to Ozzy in their own way without disruption from outsiders. The story of Ozzy's funeral was not one of loud fanfare, but a simple yet emotional gathering, where people reflected on memories, shared private moments, and honored a man who had lived his life fully for music and for life itself. There were no public speeches or flowery words, only silent tears and emotional glances from those who truly knew and loved Ozzy. For Sharon, Ozzy's funeral was not just an occasion to say goodbye. It was also a way to assert the power and respect she had for Ozzy. This was the funeral of a legend, but also the farewell of a husband, father, and life partner whom she loved. It was a goodbye that wasn't just an end, but a tribute, a thank you for all that Ozzy had given throughout his life. In the atmosphere of silence and respect, Ozzy Osbourne's funeral took place in a space full of warmth and stillness. There were no public rituals or crowds. Only family, close friends, and the immediate family of Ozzy all gathered to remember a life that had passed. There were no festivities, no stage lights, just the quiet footsteps through a silent room where people spoke to one another through glances and presence. Sharon decided to choose a more intimate space where each family member could relive their memories of Ozzy, a man not only a legend in music, but also a loving husband, father, and friend. The funeral arrangements were carefully planned, but with no showy display. Sharon wanted everything to unfold naturally as part of the farewell process without any rush or panic. Everything was arranged so that these final moments could unfold in a quiet and respectful space. For Sharon, Ozzy's funeral was not just a ceremony of honor, but also a way for her and the children to say goodbye privately with reverence and silence. This was how Ozzy had lived, and also how he left quietly without the need for noise or fanfare. Ozzy Osbourne, the man who conquered the stage and created iconic songs over decades, left in the way he had wanted, not with the shouts of a crowd, but in stillness, with the honor and love of his family. When Sharon Osbourne planned Ozzy's funeral, she knew that music would be an essential part, but it would not be like any other funeral people had attended. Sharon understood that music to Ozzy was not just a career, but an inseparable part of his life. It was the fire that had lit every path he walked. And in these final moments, music would be Ozzy's way of saying goodbye. A way for him to leave his indelible mark. One of Sharon's most important decisions was to select an unreleased version of the song See You on the Other Side. This was a song Ozzy loved and wrote in the 2000s, but its original recording had never been made public. Sharon knew this song would be a special part of the funeral. And it wasn't just any version of the song, but a remixed version that Ozzy had requested in his final months. In 2023, this was the only version Ozzy was allowed to hear, and it contained all the emotions, all the sentiments he wanted to share with his family and friends in his final moments. The music at the funeral was not about Ozzy's famous hits or the iconic songs he performed on stage. It was private music that had never been acknowledged yet had a deep meaning for him and his family. This wasn't music for entertainment, but music for connection, for touching the hearts of those who remained, and for bidding farewell to a man who had lived his life fully, for music and life itself. As the melodies of the song filled the quiet space, those present could not help but feel the depth in every note. The song was not just a farewell, but a way for Ozzy to express his love, a final goodbye, full of love and gratitude. It was a sweet sound full of warmth, but also tinged with sorrow. Like a final embrace sent to all who had walked alongside him through his life. At the final moment of the funeral, a strange thing occurred. There were no applause. This was a ceremony without accolades, without praise, without display. In that space, there was only silence, respect, and shared sorrow. Family members did not clap. There were no loud noises, but instead quiet tears, tight embraces, and presence without words. There were no speeches or grand eulogies, only emotional silence, a goodbye spoken from the heart with no need for words. 4. Sharon and Ozzy's children, those moments were precious time to remember. To hold on to all the memories of a father, a husband, a music legend. That silence, though incomparable to the applause Ozzy had received throughout his career, was a tribute greater than ever. It was the silence of gratitude, the silence of hearts, broken yet filled with love. In that silence, no one needed to say anything more. Everyone understood that the best ending for a legend was not the loud applause, but the reverence, the eternity found in the quiet sounds of music and the presence of family. Ozzy Osbourne's funeral was not an event organized to attract attention. It was not a funeral with the participation of famous figures or media reporters, but a discreet ceremony where Ozzy's family could look back on the past, reflect on the highs and lows of his life, and finally bid him farewell. In absolute respect. It was a goodbye without flowery words, but with a nod of peace and gratitude. Ozzy's legacy. When Ozzy Osbourne passed away, his musical legacy was not just defined by his famous hits, but also by the unreleased recordings, the musical treasures Ozzy had created throughout his life. As usual, Sharon Osbourne decided how to protect and preserve all of these musical assets with care and respect. Ozzy's musical assets were an important part of his legacy, but Sharon chose to protect them strictly. No public museums or organizations were created to memorialize Ozzy. Instead, every Recording, every unreleased song was kept under Sharon's control. The recordings Ozzy made in the final years of his life, many of which contain deep and honest emotions about life, illness, and death, were all preserved by Sharon in a private archive. She decided that no one outside of the Osbourne family would be allowed to determine the fate of these works. Sharon understood that music was the connection between Ozzy and his fans. But in this moment, she wanted these recordings to not become a tool for profit or part of the revival of Ozzy's legendary image. These works were for the family, for those who truly understood and loved Ozzy, and they would only be released when Sharon felt the time was right, if she chose to release them at all. The story of Ozzy's musical legacy is not just a lesson in how to preserve assets, but also a testament to the love and respect Sharon had for her husband. She did not want these treasures to become part of the music industry, but rather a part of the family's memory. This was a way to protect the essence of what Ozzy had contributed, so it could live on without being tainted by commercialization or outside interference. A surprising decision to many was Sharon's refusal to establish a public museum or charity fund in Ozzy's name. Instead of continuing to build a public legacy through organizations or grand events, Sharon chose to protect the privacy and independence of Ozzy and the family. The reason for this decision was simple yet profound. Sharon did not want Ozzy's name to be turned into a marketing tool or a commercial symbol. Sharon understood that Ozzy had given so much to the public throughout his career, and the family had the right to keep what was private to themselves. Instead of opening a museum, Sharon and the family decided to keep Ozzy in the image he had chosen, not distorted by